Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pavel Pyś. I'm a curator in the Visual Arts Department and lead curator of Multiple Realities. Welcome to The Walker. Before we begin, I'd like to ground us by acknowledging that the Walker Art Center and the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden are located on the contemporary, traditional, and ancestral homelands of the Dakota people. This site, which was once an expanse of marshland and meadow, holds meaning for the Dakota, Ojibwe, and indigenous people from other Native nations who still live in the community today. It is my great pleasure to acknowledge the many generous supporters of the exhibition. Lead funding was provided by Martha and Bruce Atwater. Additional support was provided by Carlo Broncini-Vender, Jim Kahn and Jeremiah Kolatz, Martha Gabbert, Karen and Ken Heitoff, John Thompson, the Weiser Family Foundation, as well as Anonymous. The exhibition's catalog was supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and exhibition research was supported by a curatorial fellowship from the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. I also want to thank our media partner, Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine, and acknowledge the Walker's technology partner, Atomic Data, and the voters of Minnesota who support the Walker through a Minnesota State Arts Board operating support grant, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. To mark the opening of Multiple Realities Experimental Art in the Eastern Bloc 1960s to 1980s, I very much wanted to foreground the voices of contemporary artists from the region, inviting them to reflect on how the region and the time that the exhibition looks at have impacted their practices. And this afternoon, I'm really thrilled to welcome Slovenian filmmaker Jasmina Sibic and Polish artist, performer, and choreographer Anja Novak. London-based artist and filmmaker Jasmina Sibic represented Slovenia at the 55th Venice Biennial. Her solo exhibitions include, among others, Mac Lyon, the Museum of Modern Art in Salzburg, Muzeum Sztuki Łódź, MSUM Ljubljana, CCA Glasgow, MSU Zagreb, the Ludwig Museum in Budapest. In 2021, she was awarded the Film London Jarman Award, and in 2020, she received the B3 Biennial of the Moving Image Award. Anja Novak approaches vulnerability and desire as ways towards reimagining what bodies and language can and cannot do. Novak develops formats such as live and video performance, installation, and text. In their practice, they engage with bodies in their nonlinear feeling and thinking capacity to tackle the difficulties of companionship and care in times of perpetual crisis. Anja collaborates with alternative educational programs in Eastern Europe, including the Chem School in Warsaw and the School of Kindness in Sofia. She recently had an incredible exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw that she will talk about a little bit today. And their work has also been presented at the KW in Berlin, the Museum of Contemporary Art Kiasma in Helsinki, and the 12th Gothenburg Biennial, among other places. So today, we will each offer, I invited Jasmina and Anja to offer a reflection and a little bit of an introduction to their work, but also to really think about how this period that none of us lived through, but how the shadow of this long period impacted their practices. So it's only fair that I should reciprocate and also think about that as someone who spent some time in Poland in the 1990s. And so I'm not going to offer the typical kind of curatorial statement that talks about exhibition structures, content, the shows on view, and there's plenty of content to chew through. But instead, I'm going to reflect a little bit more personally, also hopefully not being indulgent at the same time. So I want to talk a little bit about how this period and the time in some ways also impacted me. Having spent most of my childhood in Warsaw, a city that has this incredible structure in its very center, the Palace of Culture and Science. This is an unwanted gift from the Soviet Union given to the Polish people in 1955. It's an iconic building that it still continues to be divisive. Some people absolutely love it. Others hate it and keep calling for its dismantling. It's not going anywhere. For some, it's a reminder of the Soviet influence. For others, it's an eccentric and strange relic that's worth keeping. And Warsaw is really a hodgepodge of architectural styles as a place where 85% of the city was destroyed by the Nazis. So you have some elegant townhouses from before the war that have been preserved, but sometimes you come across places that feel really like they don't belong there. One of those places is MDM, which is a monumental housing estate right in the middle of Warsaw's downtown. It's a master plan kind of brainchild of socialist realism. It was designed to be a home for working class families. It was actually the place where most of the Communist Party members, clerks, and other political elites had apartments. So a quite paradoxical place, and I think paradox is something that we'll talk a little bit about when we go through these slides today. Another paradoxical site is the Soviet military cemetery, which is right next to the airport. If you land in Warsaw, you'll take a taxi into the city and you'll pass it on your way. It's a place where 21,000 Soviet soldiers who died fighting Nazi soldiers are buried. It was created in 1950. Its center is marked by a tall column with a red star and with elaborate socialist realist sculptures on the sides, which are vandalized constantly, typically on the anniversary of the Soviet invasion of Poland. It's also a vast open space, and it's perfect for fashion photo shoots, which happen there all the time as well. So Roland Barthes famously wrote that photography actually blocks memory. It quickly becomes a counter-memory. And as I was preparing for this talk, I was reflecting on how I have this very vivid memory in my mind from my childhood, from being in Budapest in 1990 or 1991. And I distinctly remember that on the iconic Széchenyi Chain Bridge, the communist emblem was shrouded. I remember looking through the back of the car and looking through the window and seeing this incredible thing, which is insignia covered by a shroud. And then in preparation for this talk, I desperately looked all over the internet. I could not find a single image that corroborates that memory. But it stuck with me for a long time. I think I was only 4 at the time, but somehow it stayed with me. And today it has been replaced with the Hungarian coat of arms. With an exhibition like Multiple Realities, I think one of the big questions is really, how do you communicate and convey such paradoxical, heavy, but also quite funny sometimes circumstances and events? This is also a time that is very much in the present. This is a Soviet-era monument that just came down in August last year. And so while it's very much a time that's present right now, it's also a time that is it's going further away from where we are. It's a time that's gathering patina, and it's a time that people are remembering differently. A recent study showed that 44% of Poles who lived through this period remember the time positively, whereas 46% remember it negatively, which is a fascinating and very close division there. But actually, this time is gathering a patina to the extent that people are collecting things that were mass-produced. So mid-century design from this moment is very popular right now. But how you try to tell this story, which was full of hardship, but also at times very funny, and some of the images here might speak to that, which is iconic images that you have from this time of people carrying rolls of toilet paper around their necks. In the galleries, you might see one image, a beautiful color image of a couple walking down the street, connected by a roll of toilet paper, which was a common sight because toilet paper was purchased in bulk in a moment of scarcity. The images also somehow read differently given the beginning of the pandemic when we all rushed to the stores. But it's also, as I said, a time of humor, and I think that image in the top left corner speaks a little bit to that. This afternoon we'll be hosting a number of performances, which will be happening in the public spaces here. One is by Roman Ondak, and it will look exactly like this. It's a work that references the act of waiting. And so I wanted to throw this slide for you so that when you come across that piece in our public spaces, you'll see the reference that it's playing with. Ryan, can you please play the clip? Aside from paradox, I think one thing that's very exciting and strange and interesting about this time is how do you unpack meaning that doesn't readily disclose its message on the surface? What we're looking at is a film from 1972 in which we see the Hungarian artist István Haraszty, talking about a work that he made called Birdcage, which is a home for a small parakeet fitted with a swing, a feeder, an electronic monitoring system. And this film is really incredible because 1972 was already a period of a harsher reality in Hungary. And when you hear the artist talk about this work, he talks about it as a cybernetic experiment. He talks about it as a form of playing with new technology, of exploring ideas around technological advancement. But I think there's something completely else going on here in this work, because the parakeet can't escape the cage. The moment the parakeet comes close to the exit of the cage, it snaps shut. And so I love this piece because there's such a double meaning happening here. The artist describes it in terms that are legible and permissible, but actually there's a completely different meaning happening here. And so this brings me to another issue, which is how do you tell a history of art that was not written in the present? The images that we see here that are upstairs in the gallery are by the Czech photographer Jan Sagl. These are from the 1970s as well, a moment when, after the Prague Spring, a moment in which the countercultural scene was really heavily policed. And Jan and his wife Zorka were really at the center of that scene. And they understood that as their friends were suddenly facing house searches and police arrests, they could see that their lives were about to change. And Jan created this very beautiful group of photographs that just simply document the domestic bliss that they were sharing at the time, understanding that soon someone would be coming to search their apartment. And so he took these photographs, they packed up all their belongings, and then when the police came, there was barely anything in the apartment. But the story of the photographs is great because the negatives were given to a friend who put them under his floorboards. And then years later, he added a concrete floor, having forgotten about the negatives under the floorboards. And so they were presumed lost. And then in 2012, friends of the artist came to him and said, "Oh, I found these negatives in a coffee box in my library." And the images were developed and shown for the first time. And so I think another conundrum, another paradox here is, how do you tell a story of art that sometimes has a delay of 40 years? How do you also tell a story of art that might look like it is referencing quite late, let's say in the mid-1980s, referencing the language of interdisciplinary experimentation that happened in the West in the 1960s or the 1970s. But in reality, the work that you see upstairs was made by an artist who did not have any proximity to those references and to those figures. And so how do you really invite viewers and audiences to take that work on its own terms? I think there are many things about the show that, despite it, of course, being historical material, it really sparkles in the present, for better and worse. And I think here there are two works that feel incredibly relevant, particularly given aggression in the region, the war in Ukraine. We have here on the left an iconic piece that we've remade for the exhibition for the first time, Gyula Konkoly's Bleeding Monument. On the right-hand side, we have Tamás Szentjóby's Portable Trench for Three, two works that really reference the events of the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, the really somber reality of having to carry wounded bodies through public space, the reality of having to care for people in a time of war and conflict. I think these are, of course, themes that feel very much relevant to where we are today. I think an inspiring part of many of the practices in the show is that they tell us a story about how to occupy space. They tell us a story of how artists were subverting behavior in public space. They tell us a story of how to gather. They also tell us a story of the risks of occupying public space. They remind us of the importance of disobedience, of standing up, of fighting for what you believe in. And I think that as you experience the works, there are visual languages here that feel as if they could have happened today. Here we have some images of a performance called Resonances from 1979. And this is another work that, as you negotiate our building today, you might experience a series of performers obstructing your way, obstructing your passage through the museum, but also a way of coming together and being together that is very much a form of protest, of occupying space. A big message that runs through this show is really a message of solidarity and of friendship and of mutual support and of being together. And when I think about what artists are doing today, young artists, that seems key to thinking about how artists are sharing space, but also reimagining their role as citizens, as institution builders. These are just two examples that really resonate, I think, given the material that we see in the galleries. On the left is Crip Fund, which is a resource, an online resource that is a fundraising resource organized by disabled and Crip artists. On the right, we have the South Central LA project by Lauren Halsey, which is called Summer Everything, a free local organic produce community center, a really important resource and an amazing art project. Another theme that I think sparkles today when we see the show is the issue of surveillance. And I love the work in the first gallery because it really, in a very analog and in a very straightforward way, it shows the mechanisms of surveillance. I'm particularly thinking of the photographs of Ion Grigorescu, but also this beautiful painting here by Matei Lazarescu. On the left is an object that I saw when I was doing one of the studio visits for this show. It's a really amazing thing that I can't believe still exists. This is essentially a piece of plastic that someone shaped and attached to a piece of wood. The wood was hollowed out. So at the very bottom here is a little perforation. This object was made by the secret police in Romania, and they attached the plastic component to a humidifier, and they would slip the wooden element under an envelope, and they would use the mist from the humidifier to open the envelope and monitor your correspondence. I love many things about this object. I love the fact that it's handmade. I think it's amazing that it still exists because so many of these materials were destroyed. But I think it's also a reminder of how this persists and continues in our lives, but we would be really hard-pressed to actually find an object like this anymore because surveillance today is, of course, much more insidious, much more invisible, much, much less noticeable. I want to close by again just reminding everyone of the importance of joy and of fun and of hanging out and being together. In the galleries, there are many images of that, of queer underground spaces, of musical concerts, of gatherings, of artists drinking, trying new things. And on the left is an image of Sadie Barnett's The New Eagle Creek Saloon, which is a project that references the first Black-owned gay bar in San Francisco, a project that you will soon see at the Walker. And so I think it's important to end on that note of conviviality, of friendship, and of community. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Yasmina. To Anya, sorry.